Hello, hello! Welcome to Watching Silent Films, where we watch a feature film or a series of films, and we talk about it. Here with me are co-hosts Bob and Lily. Hello, greetings again.
Hello, greetings again.
Long time no talk. So, this week, it's going to be kind of like a bonus episode, I kind of call it, because we're just going to talk about Dante's Inferno, Bertolini and Company from Italy in 1911. I'm going to read the real quick description of what this film is, and then we'll just keep going. Italy took France's film art movement to new heights with this internationally successful epic, depicting the classic tale of Dante in the circles of hell. It is the first Italian feature length, and the visuals are based on Gustave Dore's woodcuts from Divine Comedy, which can be found. I guess they link to a full print of the entire artwork from the Gustave Dore's woodcuttings. Have you guys heard of the Gutenberg project? Side note, but it's related.
I have, but I don't know what it is.
So, as you know, Gutenberg is the printing press, right? He was the guy who created the thing where you can mass produce books, essentially.
Oh, okay.
You guys know that, right?
Yes.
All right, cool. So, like, this online, Gutenberg.org, is taking his name and basically saying anything that literature, like, or any literary work that's in the public domain, we're going to try to make it available on the internet for free. So that was their desire, because it's trying to accomplish a mission where, like, knowledge is free instead of locked behind, like, you have to pay for books and stuff like that. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool about that is works like this can now be found for free online. So the entire collection of woodcutting. Now, Gustave Dore is an artist who did a lot of just paintings and woodcutting and carvings and various different things. He's a kind of is a French artist, printmaker, illustrator, comic artist, caricature sculptor. His primary thing is wood engraving. He engraved these illustrations in wood, and then the impression you take from the wood on paper is the result of what you see. So that's kind of how he worked his art. And so he, in this Gutenberg link, there's a full sort of collection of his entire works of his artwork called, I think that the title for this is called The Vision of Hell by Dante Alighieri, but it's translated, of course, by Henry Francis Carey. But the artwork is by Gustave Dore, and he's the guy that a lot of the film's framing is based on. So it's interesting because in a few weeks we're also going to talk about Alice Guy Blaché, and she did a Life of Christ based on another great artist, James Tossett's watercolors. And so you'll see these filmmakers take these great artists' work and basically made it into films. So I thought that was interesting. So anyways, knowing that is going to be tremendously helpful for us kind of taking a look at this movie. So before we get to the movie, have you guys read the book, or you guys know of the story of the book, or thoughts or comments about the book itself?
I've known about it since high school.
Right.
Dante's Inferno. I personally haven't read it.
I read it a few years ago, as a matter of fact. It's a very hard read.
You read the Carey's translation, right? Because he's the guy who translated from Italian to English. Old English, really.
I have no idea whose translation it was.
Yeah, I mean, typically, almost all of the works that we have today of this Divine Comedy, it's written in Italian, and it was translated in the 1800s by this translator. So it would be him, usually. I don't think I've
It's a
read
very,
another.
very big book.
Yeah, and they're all they're all fat books. So
It's a big book, and it's very hard reading. It's
exactly because it's kind of like a epic poem.
exactly.
It's
And I
not
found myself
really.
going over chapters several
It's not
times to
really
figure them out.
a narrative. It's not like a typical novel
It
or
is
story.
absolutely not, and
Yeah,
it is actually actually is pretty hard to decipher
exactly.
what they're talking about because a lot of it is allegory.
And imagery.
Yeah,
Right.
it's I I didn't enjoy reading it very much. I was forcing myself to get through it, so the movie was much more entertaining to watch.
Yeah. So yeah. So I've had this book for a long time, and it's one of those things that I wanted to go back to try to read.
Good luck.
I've taken a few stabs at it over the years, and
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever. Mostly due to my own laziness, mind you. I'm not.
It took forever. It
Well,
took me
I'm
forever to
just-
get through it because holy cow! I want to say it was really like reading the same chapter several times in a row just to
Yeah.
understand.
Well, because the nature of poem and poetry.
Mhm.
That's the hard part. It's not so much the content, because I actually recently myself I've taken into reading more now than I probably read more in the last 2 years probably than ever in my entire life. I find that it helps to sharpen my mind, because if I don't read, this is just my own personal self. I know that if I don't read, my brain just rots from watching a ton of movies, whether it's silent movies or any other movies or content or something. As I've taken up to reading all sorts of things, and one of the things I really want to get through, maybe this year, maybe next year, is try to read through all the books I own, which is sad because I used to buy a ton of books thinking I'll get to reading them, and so I'm like, now's the time. So I'm gonna, and this is Dante's Inferno is definitely one of the books that is on my list. I pulled out my copy, and I think I sat in the sun somewhere, and like the edges were all like browned out. It's like, wow, it's been in the sun, weird, or something. I don't know. Like it's got wear and tear because when I bought it new, and I haven't even read it, but it's got wear and tear just from age, just aged wine or something. So yeah, and while I really wanted to kind of discover the story by reading it myself, because of this movie, I ended up just going ahead and reading the story summaries in my research, kind of the cliff notes, as it were. And of course, there's a lot of competitors now out there. I think Sparks Notes is another one. There's a bunch of other ones, and I kind of high level figured out the story, where it's a epic poem devoted to what he's writing about is this main character basically has, so Dante's personal life, he himself was married but was in love with another, I think, woman or girl who was called Beatrice, and so like his sort of passion and love for this and girl who died young ended up being something, was an inspired muse for one of the first works that he wrote about another series of poems, love poems about this girl. I think after she died, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But then ultimately this character is in the book. So in this book, Dante's Divine Comedy, she is the object of his affection. She is the one that he longs to be reunited with, because she's dead, and he wants to basically go through hell and purgatory and reach the heavens and be reunited with her. Essentially, that's the story. And so this story takes place across 3 separate parts. Inferno is the first one, which takes him through hell. And I sent a link earlier to you guys. I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch that, but it summarizes the story, and the visuals were very interesting to me, because the way he approached it was in this story that Dante would go, like his story was that this character would go in like, you know how like when you like the saying that if you dig far enough from here, you're gonna end up in China, on the other side of the earth. Conceptually, that's how they're framing hell. So you would start here in a cave somewhere, you go down in hell, and you go traverse through all these different things, and then all the circles of hell, and then end up on the other side of the earth, where there would be some sort of like a pyramid or something like that he would traverse, and that's the purgatory part, or mountain rather. And once you climb that mountain, it would then go to the next phase, which is paradise. And once you go beyond paradise, you would then essentially get to heaven. So that's the three. The book itself, the work itself, the epic poem is divided into three parts: hell, purgatory, and paradise. And there are 9 circles of hell, and there are 7 terraces of purgatory, loosely correlated with the 7 deadly sins. And I want to say 9, or I forgot the last part, but whatever the last part is, it's kind of the spheres. The last few is the spheres of heaven. And once you kind of journey through the entire thing, that's when he reaches heaven and gets reunited with Beatrice and stuff like that. So that's high level, the story. So, but this film is only focused on the infernal part, which takes a journey through it. It doesn't even do, it doesn't even go on to purgatory or paradise. Okay? And so, that's why I wanted to highlight before we get into the film itself. It's just the original work itself, because this film is so, I think it takes a lot of deep cuts into the story, especially in the Inferno section. So I think if you don't know the original work itself, it's going to be really hard to comprehend, even though it's got a really rich imagery, right, in the film.
I agree.
Oh, yeah. And
so if you don't know anything about Dante or Inferno, then you will be irreparably lost. So, just some background. This is a 1911 Italian silent film. It's adapted from not just the work itself of literature, but also again based on the Gustavo Gore's wood carving artwork. And it screened on March 10th, 1911. It made a lot of money, $2 million US, which is pretty significant. I think it's roughly 22 mil or something, modern day money, which is nothing to scoff at. So yeah, do you guys have any initial thoughts about the film itself? We can finally get into the film itself.
Well, as you were saying a little bit ago, it's kind of hard to follow, but from just watching this movie, I thought I followed along pretty well, minus, all the names that kept popping up. Because I don't have quite the book context of the original story, I was like, who are all these people? But, they bring up the, I guess, Roman gods, which are just the Greek gods and everything related to that kind of myth and lore. And then they bring up Christianity people like Caiphus, I think, because he was... I read who he was, because I actually thought he was the same person as Judas, but he's not. He's just like some guy that plots to kill Jesus. But it just, all these names were, kind of thrown in there, because I've also heard of Virgil, but I'm not 100% sure who he is in history. But for the most part, I thought it was actually very well planned out. I mean, they're just, basically it's a travel job that they're running on, so they're just traveling around the 7 realms of hell.
Yep. It's a guided tour.
It really is a guided tour.
Any thoughts, Bob?
Well, I enjoyed watching it. I thought the music was very eerie, and it was constant. I think the sense of misery and dread, I think it's constant because it wants to wear on the viewer's psyche and make them realize this is dismal.
Right. You
Right.
guys watched that YouTube link, right?
Yeah.
Not sure.
You watched it on YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
I watched it whichever way you came through.
Yeah, I linked
Yeah,
it.
yeah, on YouTube. Yeah,
Yeah,
you sent it to me.
So the reason why I asked is because if you guys read the comments under the YouTube, you realized that that whole thing that you watched was actually shot with the music accompaniment, like live.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I did see that. That was
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
That's what I mean. So
And at the end of the film, you actually hear the audience clap.
exactly, that's what I mean to say. So if you read the comments at the bottom, it says, "I was asked by the organization Cinema Ray in early September 2016." Oh, I think the music's come on. Mute it. Let me see. Oh, okay. So the comment says, "I was asked by organization." This is Mike Kiker in 2017. He said, "I was asked by organization Cinema Ray in early September 2016 to perform a live score with a silent horror film as part of their month-long Silent Screams with Live Music series. Of the choices I was given, L'Inferno was the first film that I watched, and even before finishing it or watching any of the other films, I knew this was the film meant for me. I was disturbed on a psychic level, yet intrigued at what amazing feats the filmmakers had accomplished in their day. With the exception of the overture recorded in September 2016, and a few recurring themes, this score is about 95% improvised. I worked out various sounds and progressions, but didn't decide on a set structure until within the performance itself. I just reacted naturally to the feel of the film as it progressed. This was an absolute labor of love put together with Rich and Allison from Cinema Ray and to release. Enjoy with an open mind."
Wow.
So, like, this hasn't been released on the, like, most recently. I think the last few releases was from like more than 20 years ago, and I think the Tangerine Dreams or something. Is that?
I love Tangerine Dream.
So they did a soundtrack for this.
I can understand that.
Yeah. So that copy is probably on DVD, and it's probably due to rights issues. Probably not on YouTube, at least not legally. So that's what I've been saying is
own 3 or 4 albums by Tangerine Dream.
right. So they actually done a number of silent films, by the way, just so you know.
Mhm.
So but the point is, it's hard to get access to those versions of this film on YouTube because it's it's copyrighted, right? So it's illegal to rip that and put it on YouTube. They would just take that down. But the DVD is out of print, so you can't even like order it from anywhere online. And the copies are limited releases because they run a few pressings of this. When they run a press, it'd be like 1,500 copies or 1,000 copies or whatever. And once it's gone, it's gone. So you can only buy them on eBay or something for, I haven't checked, but it's supposedly like for a couple $100 because they're limited. Like it doesn't even exist. You can't even legitimately buy it from anywhere because of the limited resource, right? But unfortunately, that's kind of the way silent films are.
Yeah.
Is it's hard to get access.
Yeah, I bought them as imports.
Exactly.
So I thought it was very interesting too. I love where they use the line. It's a classic line. It's used like it always makes me think of Dungeons and Dragons. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here.
Exactly.
When they were about to go into the cave, it was like, uh-oh.
But that's from the book, right? So.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, it's from
but
the
I
book.
don't remember it distinctly.
Yeah, it's the right before the gates of hell. That's the word. Any other thoughts?
I thought there was a very clever scene where the bodies were swirling around it looked like they were in the air.
Yeah.
And it was very easy to tell that what he did is he took a bunch of bodies on the floor and he walked around them with the camera focused on them.
Yeah.
And then he took the scene and he rotated it.
Yeah.
But it was still very cool to see all these bodies flying around above them, looking like they were ghostly, flying, when, modern critical eye, I mean, it looks like they're lying on the ceiling, but
Right.
I still thought it was clever. I liked it. I also like the scene where with the severed head, where the man comes out holding up his severed head.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, that got me. That was crazy.
Yeah, that was very good. And I love the scene with Satan. I mean, I thought I never heard of Satan having three faces, but the way they had him eating the person,
Yeah.
you know, that half the body was in his mouth. That was freaky too.
There's all these is from the books. So that's why I said it's deep cuts, because it's like he kept so close to the books. Like all of these things.
But even this movie, even as long as it was, it can't cover. It only covers a fraction of what's in those books.
Well, it's a third of the
in
books,
book.
right? Because in terms of the scope of the story, right? Because remember, this is only the hell part. Remember, there's a purgatory, and then there's other paradise. So this movie doesn't even deal with any of those. But you're right.
Right.
Even under the infernal, the hell parts, there's 9 circles of hell. But if you dig in the I think the 8th circle of hell, there's like 10 pouches or different sections they go through, and then the 9th circle of hell has 4 different zones. So like, it's actually not just like, I mean, it is 9 circles, but it's also like each of those circles, the last 2 is another like 14 zones.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's like, 14 plus, 7, right? So it's like closer to 21 sections.
Yeah.
Of hell.
And I was reading on my phone, and so, and oh my goodness, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but going through it page by page on my phone and having to back scroll and forward scroll and back scroll, wow.
Yeah. Oh, you mean you read the book on your phone?
I read the book on my commute to work on my phone, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which was not the best way to read it.
That's like going to hell, right? Must be hell. So, first thing I want to note is that in the beginning, there's like these like lion, and leopard, and a she-wolf, I guess.
Yeah, there are 3 wolves: avarice, pride, and lust.
Right, but the wolf is just a canine dog.
Exactly.
I love how it's just a dog coming to the
camera. Oh, right. Oh, yeah. He dressed
like,
up,
oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that's the fearsome she-wolf. But anyway.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah, I love that little... Must be his personal pet or something.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Actually, my first comment on the movie was that my first impression for the first few scenes was it felt like a home movie.
Yeah.
But with the music and with the topic, you quickly let that go. It's like watching a stage production. And
Exactly.
you quickly get into it. So.
Yeah.
And like a stage production too, since we were just talking about the animals, I thought the puppetry was really good and the monsters they had to create, because that's what I thought the first animal, so it was supposed to be a panther that represented avarice, which I didn't think that connection went very well. But the way they kind of had the monster framed, you couldn't tell what kind of animal it was, whether it was real or just a guy in a suit. And it made it extra creepy too, so I thought that was very interesting. And then Dante's just like, oh geez, what's going on, let me go near it, oh maybe I'll walk away, oh I don't know. This guy like, what is his deal?
Again, like this type of very theatrical stage, very conceptual sort of acting, and by its nature this epic poem is kind of that way. It's a lot more symbolic.
Yeah. I couldn't figure out why they called it a poem. It did not seem like a poem to me. It didn't have any rhyming, that's for sure. But
I think it meant more along the idea of the Iliad, because that's supposed to be a thematic poem, and that kind of reminded. I mean, I thought that's how the connection could be.
Yes. So the connection is that the Virgil is the author of Aeneid, and Aeneid is essentially the founding of Rome. Like the way that the Rome was founded is because of the Romulan and Remus. There's two brothers, and I forgot the details now. But the point is that he wrote that work, and he based a lot of it. He has a lot of links with Homer's, Odyssey and Iliad, because it's kind of like the Roman side of the similar types of story, the Trojan War and stuff like that. And so Dante, just the book itself, the epic poem, when he wrote it, he based it on a lot of research, like things that he himself was reading at the time, and a lot of the mythology of the Greek and Roman myth got seeped into his work, but also combined with his sort of take on sort of Christian mythology, not necessarily the Bible itself, but just sort of many things surrounding Christianity and Catholicism itself. So it wasn't just like he's adapting the Bible. He was also going deep into a lot of, there's a term called Christian mysticism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, it gets into like, things that are not in the Bible, but in like ancillary stories attached to it.
Well, it's true that a lot of the imagery that that most people are accustomed to thinking of as hell and Satan comes from this story.
Exactly. You're talking about Dante itself, the work. Yeah.
The work,
exactly.
yeah. Created a facet of our society, and even worldwide, where the devil is seen in a certain way and the hell is seen in a certain way, the lake of fire.
Even Haxan, right? Haxan heavily influenced by this, right?
Yep.
Remember when we watched that? The look of Haxan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to kind of go through circle by circle of how
No.
But that's essentially the story, is that it takes you through a journey. So Virgil is the author of Aeneid, and that's why he's kind of the guide for the main character. So that it follows sort of the poet himself. I think essentially Dante inserted himself into the story, as he's kind of the main eyes of the audience in the book itself, but also in the movie. And so Dante himself was guided by Virgil, as if Virgil, the author, was kind of his muse, but also a tour guide, and that kind of helped him along on this tour. And in the beginning of the movie, Virgil was talking to Virgin Mary and sort of discussing what, and feeling sorry for like Dante's deceased love, Beatrice. And that's why like Virgil in the movie was having a conversation with Virgin Mary, and that's why they sent Virgil to help him be a tour guide essentially through his journey. So that's like, if you didn't know that from the story in the beginning, it would be confusing. Like, who are all these characters just popping up randomly?
Yep. And just as a side note, I'd also say that I don't think I've ever seen another movie with so many naked bodies before.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, the naked bodies.
Well, it's the torment thing.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. I mean, it's like living in a volcano. The clothes are all burnt away, I guess.
I think I'm pretty sure that most of the guys have like loincloth.
Oh yes, they do.
So
they do
totally. But
well, that's a necessity. Yeah, even then they had that much decency, but it was bizarre to say the least. It was a bit eye-opening.
Well, I think it has to. I wonder if, because it's in the paintings. So if you look at, I actually did look at.
Well, it's a spiritual analogy in that So, I'm sorry, you were saying that about the paintings?
Yeah, so if you look at the paintings, it's all from the paintings. So in the paintings, it has all those imagery, the naked bodies and stuff like that, the torment,
Right
from hell. But also like, the painting itself, I would say, is inspired by some of the Renaissance painters who had images of hell as well.
Right.
It starts with a B. Bosch.
Ah.
So Bosch, if you guys know Hieronymus Bosch.
Can't pull the image up in my head, no.
Yeah, so Hieronymus Bosch looks like is Dutch. He's born in the Netherlands, and his notable painting is called Garden of Earthly Delights. So it's the Temptation of St. Anthony, and some of these classic paintings dating back to 1500, like around that time. He worked on this, I think, for 20 years or something like that.
Whoa.
But if you look at this particular painting, it's all that imagery of the naked body theme, also of just grotesqueness and all that stuff. It's all in the paintings that he works on himself. A lot of, I think, is traced back to his, and I'm sure he himself is inspired by other people, no doubt. But that's kind of the big name that inspires many others for paintings of pictures of hell and what they look like, and I am sure it has inspired. I haven't researched, but I bet you it's going to inspire this guy, Gustave Doré, as he's making his wood carving art. It's gotta, because he would have known about these Renaissance artists. You know what I mean? So, because they're so highly influential. You know what I mean? So.
The book Dante's Inferno was written like 1860, something like that?
Right. But the painting is all these woodwork artwork is much later. Is in the 1800s. So the actual artwork, which the movie is based on, almost less the book itself, if that makes sense. All that imagery, it's heavily, lifted, frame by frame from these the artwork. So. Any other thoughts or comments?
Well, just going back to everything that they basically did in the movie, that was just so impressive with their special effects. They had rigs on some of the actors to make them fly. What else did they do? The face paint and body paint. What else? I already mentioned the puppetry with the animals, which is pretty amazing.
Well, really, it's the whole visual effects of composition. Like, to combine multiple sort of footage, of, like you were saying, Bob, earlier, of, taking a one pass of people upside down on floors and flipping them upside down, and taking another pass, essentially optically printing visual effects on top of another. And that's how they did it, is they would have a optical printer taking multiple film negatives and making sort of almost like a copy of one on top of the other. I don't think you were here for that, Bob, but like, Lily, remember back there was a Christmas experimental short?
Oh yeah, the Christmas one. That was one of the first ones we watched.
Yeah, and that's what he did. He made a short of the Santa Claus going down the chimney, and he played that back in a projector, and then he used another camera, a secondary camera, to film another scene to the side of the frame, and therefore the camera would capture both the projected image, which is projected on the wall, and the live action that's happening next to the projected image, therefore compositing both images. Does that make sense? So as if
Mm-hmm.
the character on the left is thinking, has a thought bubble with another scene.
Right.
So that's like conceptually very similar. I don't know how they did it in this movie, but like the way they're doing composition is probably the biggest.
It's like a split
innovation.
screen, but not split with a soft. So it looks like one scene.
Well, it's a composition. I mean, that's how
Composition,
modern visual effects are done. If you think about it, is that
Right.
it's, when they do green screen, they knock out the green.
Exactly.
And they replace the green with whatever it is, that they're supposed to be in, So
this is way ahead of the time as that goes.
But conceptually, I mean, George Méliès did that. I mean, that's all the composition, all the visual effects, right? With A Trip to the Moon. So, it's like nothing new under the sun by the time that these films came around. But yes, you're right. Like above and beyond the musical compositions, definitely all those other, technology techniques of various different set pieces and costume design are certainly pretty cool. I did think that some of the long shots too were pretty amazing. Like when they're in a mountain somewhere with fog, they're probably in a mountain with fog somewhere.
Yeah, that. Sorry. Yeah, I thought that was impressive as well. The scenes with the fog.
Or if they have a crowd of people like stretching on to the horizon, that's probably a crowd of people in a big hill somewhere. Or if they're on a boat and they're paddling towards somewhere, that's probably in a lake or sea somewhere, heading towards
right.
some mountain. That's probably real, right?
Yeah.
So I like that too, because there's some aspects of this film that captures related to things we talked about last week, or the previous podcast rather, but about just capturing a slice of life that might not exist anymore today,
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the Circles of Hell was about just raining and weather effect. That was pretty cool too.
Yeah, that's I really wonder how they got all that water wherever they were.
Yeah. What if it's real rain? And they just started shooting. It's raining now. Let's do it.
That is an idea. I mean, that could have been a thing.
I don't know.
Oh, this isn't 100% related to what... I mean, it is, but it isn't. Because of this movie, though, I actually was looking up if the Devil's Pitchfork was inspired by Dante's Inferno, but then because of the props that they were using, I don't know why it came to me, but it's just one of those things that because of this movie, it made me intrigued to find out, because I actually thought, because the movie is 110 years old, this is where more of our modern imagery comes from. And in essence, no, it doesn't. It all started around the like they call it the High Middle Ages. I'm guessing that's possibly the 1500s.
That's where Bosch's painting came along. But Bosch's painting is so influential with our image of hell and all that stuff, because until then, I mean, I don't know for sure, but there weren't a lot of physical paintings actualized as artwork yet. I don't think, at least not to that degree, to that gory degree. Yeah, so check it out, and you guys have time to just Google Bosch, not the Amazon show, but the the painter from Renaissance era, and the Garden of Earthly Delights is the big one, amongst others. There are other artists too. He's not the sole contributor, but he was a big one. I'm sure there are others too that I distinctly remember seeing that when I had art class a long time ago. But there's a few of those influences, just incredible. Highly influential.
Glad I brought it up then.
All right, folks. Any other parting thoughts about this? I think I may have missed one significant part of the work itself, and why it was significant, at least in the history of just literature itself. So when it was, the work itself was written and came out, the common language of that time was Latin. You either wrote in Greek or Latin. That was pretty much it. It was the dominant intellectual sort of language of its time, in spite of the fact that the local cultures, the vernacular culture, still existed. And so for Italy, everything was Latin. But this is the first work. Dante really wanted to write this in Italian and made it so, I guess, localized that it all of the flavors and all of the textures of the story can only be told in Italian, is the reason why he created that way. And that really kind of set the country on its course of Italian literature, essentially. Because for a while a lot of that was lost, I think, due to just not just the Crusades, but a lot of the historical political happenings and wars and different things happening, where a lot of the culture was becoming more normalized, right? To a degree we could only use Greek and Roman ways to communicate.
I mean, there are still people who say that you can't watch an opera unless it's in Latin.
Right. So the point is that, this author finally was like, I'm going to take that back and kind of reclaim his Italian culture back in the time that the original work was published, right? And that's the significance of Dante's Inferno, is that he put a stake in the ground, for the culture of Italian language and culture. Along with all the other influences that we just talked about. So
it's funny, I'm a Star Trek fan, and Star Trek continually references works. It's supposed to be in the 24th century, and continually reference works and says, well, you can't appreciate this work unless you hear it in its original Klingon.
Yeah.
So it's something like that,
Yeah, it's I think it's Star Trek 6, right? It's like you can't appreciate Shakespeare until you read in the original Klingon.
Well, they do it in the TV series as well. So it started even in the original series. They did that. It's pretty funny stuff.
Yeah.
But you can see where it comes from. This sort of... It comes from what you were just saying,
All right, folks, any other parting thoughts before we conclude?
I think I mentioned all that I wanted to talk about. And I think I learned a lot more about the movie, too, just from us discussing it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I would recommend at least reading some of the synopsis of the 9 Circles of Hell, because once you do, at least for me, because I hadn't really read the epic poem myself, but once you know what the book story is, and then when you watch the movie, you're like, oh, that's Virgin Mary in the beginning talking to Virgil? Like that, things like that starts to make sense. Actually, talking about this reminds me for one small bit is that he himself, Dante, the author in real life, he took up a political cause that was on an opposition party from sort of the mainstay. So he's kind of in the minority of his voice or whatever, the complicated stuff he was doing. And essentially he was exiled politically. And so at the last Circle of Hell, he put all his political opponents into the actual story of Inferno. Because he wrote this right before he died. I don't think he knew he was going to die, but he put their
nudge,
real
nudge,
people
wink, wink.
into.
This is where you're heading.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He's like these political opponents and these people and that's why it references so many people A lot of them were just simply real. Like, they were like the real neighbors or people he actually knew. He just put them in the story.
The taboo you're not supposed to do in writing, right?
Right. Well, he didn't care. I
Obviously.
Yeah. I think to get back at people.
He didn't just insult people. He put them in hell.
Literally, right? in his story, right? So. But, yeah, I mean, that was the ninth circle. I think it was fraud or something. Let me look this up. Oh, okay. So the final 2 circles of hell includes all the sinners of ordinary fraud and treacherous fraud. So all the people that he thought was fraudsters would, lie and cheat people out of whether they want his political opponents. He placed into the final circle of hell.
Wow.
Yeah. He's got some issues, this guy. But
and yet there are statues of paintings of him all over.
yeah, that reminds me of another point, because I found that, I mean, I haven't really read the book. I just found that interesting that Dante being, I feel like writing a work like this, you'd have to be kind of a little bit judgmental. So,
what you were just saying, is pretty much the extreme of that. Yes. So when you say there's this degree of sin, and there's this level degree of sin, and who's the one to put them in one box or the other?
Well, it's Dante. So what's interesting is that he had a circle for like adulteress, and yet he himself was, because he was married, but he was lusting after this, Beatrice. Like, it's so contradictory, right? He himself was the person that should be in these circles, but he wrote the work. You know what I mean? I don't know. Right. I thought that was fascinating.
It is. Physician,
but that's just
treat
people.
Thyself.
I think it's just people. Any people is like that.
It's amusing.
It is. All right. Any other parting thoughts?
Nope.
No.
Yeah, I was gonna try to take us through all of the circles, but I think you guys can read that separately. But yeah, this work is highly influential from just a literary work of art, but also the artist who created the wood carving art that inspired this is also influential and also inspired by early Renaissance painters of commissioned works of images of hell. And also just finally the film. I'm not sure if there's been any other versions since this one. That would be interesting to find out. I wonder if there are. I think with the amount of visual effects, could potentially see it being done.
I mean, the one thing I'll say is that there was a film by Robin Williams which very much went on the same theme, where his wife died and he went through hell to find her. And do you remember the title?
I saw it in the theaters.
It's I've almost got it, but I can't quick. It's that.
What Dreams May Come.
What Dreams May Come.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I saw that, I thought the same thing. I thought, oh, it's a complete take from Dante's Inferno.
Yeah. Yeah, Robin Williams does pretty interesting movies. So, in general. I mean, he does comedy, but he's quite a thoughtful guy, and he's, over the years, done a lot of great films like this one. I think I saw this in the theater. But you're right, yeah, that was one of the things I was thinking of. But I don't think I've seen any other adaptations.
Not direct adaptations of the Inferno.
Yeah, it would be interesting if anybody ever adapts this using modern effects and stuff like that, and can kind of keep
Could
it
be
close.
very eerie.
It would be. It'd be like Haxan all over again. I don't know. I don't know why I keep linking to Haxan. I just feel like that one's so striking visually, in a very similar vein to this film. Just visually, it's totally striking, right? So.
Yep.
I guess in the sense of, what do I want to say? Probably the set, of course. There's some similarities there. Yeah. I mean, it's the theme. But then again, that was more about witchcraft, and then this is more
Right.
like historical fiction. I don't know, but I know what you mean. They're similar, but at the same time, they're totally different movies.
Oh yeah, for sure. They're definitely totally different movies, because this one's adapting a literary work, whereas the other one is not. But I just thought visually, it's just anytime you have a film trying to visually represent, evil or Satan or Lucifer or hell or any of those things, I just always find that like interesting that they have a visual take on it.
It's almost hard to imagine, for me, a take on something where it's trying to explain hell in a way that's completely new and separate from Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the point I was trying to make.
It's almost inconceivable,
Right,
but
because it's so groundbreaking.
it's right. It's so fundamental to our culture that you have to someone to separate it, to literally separate it in their mind and say, no, I'm not going to go that route.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Cool. All right, so that concludes our look at L'Inferno 1911 film by a variety of people worked on it, and it's the first Italian feature length, and it's quite the epic, and it almost makes sense that they would adapt Dante's Inferno because of how influential that work itself was as well. And it's hard to get in terms of DVD because of a limited release, as we talked about before. So the best way to watch it is still on that YouTube link. I'll place all that link into our podcast show notes. And with that, we can conclude this week's podcast. And please, again, thank you, listeners. Wherever you're finding us, if you can place a review or star rating on especially Apple Podcast. You can find more of our work on Watching Silent Films, plural, watchingsilentfilms.wordpress.com, or you can also email us at watchingsilentfilms@gmail.com. And with that, we'll say thank you, and thank you, Bob. Thank you, Lily, and we'll chat later. Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Peace out. Bye.
See ya.